Hi, y'all. I'm Chanel Alcoholic. Um, yeah, I'm put on the spot by my dad. I'm so excited. No, but actually, I feel so comfortable speaking in front of most of you because you guys watched me grow up. So, this is a perfect way to, have my first speaking experience. Anyways, Chanel Alcoholic. How it started, I grew up with two alcoholics. My biological dad is an alcoholic, and my mom's an alcoholic, and it kind of runs in the family, and it was always around, and I wasn't, I was always around it, and I remember when I was a kid, I just felt different from all my friends because when we were talking about our families, like I had a single mom and most of my friends had like moms and dads. Most of my friends had houses and I lived in a one-bedroom apartment sharing a room with my mom, and I just always felt different, And when they would talk about their parents, it was just like, a loving memory, and mine was more of like a broken home. And so, that was how I grew up and stuff. And because alcohol was so prominent in my family, I swore to myself I was never going to touch it, ever. Like I hated alcohol and I hated what it did to my family. And I was able to resist it for like the longest time in high school and stuff until that one time, that I didn't. And the first time I drank, I knew I was an alcoholic because my mom ended up getting sober when I was in middle school, and I hung around the rooms and I heard you guys share, and I did my homework in the coffee room or in the meeting, and I heard enough to know that when I drank, it wasn't normal. And, when I first drank, I loved it. I felt a part of, I felt like I could be comfortable in my own skin. I felt confident. I felt kind of like a superhero that I could do anything. And, I know that's like how most people feel that are alcoholics. It's just like this thing that finally allows us to breathe and feel calm and not feel jittery and not feel uncomfortable. And I love that feeling. I love the feeling it gave me. And I wasn't going to stop. I knew I was an alcoholic, and I was like, let's go. And, as the years gone on, they say it's a progressive disease, and it surely did progress. It was fun in the beginning until it wasn't fun, until I had been through like a couple of horrible experiences that I just wanted to run away from, and I didn't want to feel my feelings, and so I drank to numb everything. And it's funny, like they say you stop growing when you start drinking. And for me, I stopped growing at 19. I was always just looking for the next party. I didn't care about life. I didn't care about school. That was my main goal. Like my main goal was to drink and to drug, and I would do anything to get those things. And, when I got to the point where, alcoholics didn't even want to drink with me anymore, that was when I knew I was in really big trouble. Like I already knew I was an alcoholic, but I was like, shit, like they don't even want to drink with me. And so then I started, just being a closet drinker and drinking at home by myself. And, I don't really need to tell you guys how empty you feel, and, the shame you feel when you look in the mirror. And, I wasn't only just hurting myself, I was hurting everybody and anything around me. And I remember when I was at my end point, I was kind of like contemplating, do I call my mom? Do I tell her? Because if I tell her, then I know that she's going to be on my ass, and then I really can't drink. And I was all like, ugh. And before I could even call her, she calls me. And I don't know what had happened, like what was the, like what made her think that something was wrong. But she was just like, she called me and she's like, Chanel, what is going on? And I was like, I'm an alcoholic. And I was like, I just needed to yell it out there and tell on myself, because if I didn't do it right then and there, I knew I was going to have, a couple years more of drinking, or I didn't know what was going to happen. Like, I was lucky enough not to go to jail, not to get arrested, not to get in any trouble. But I knew that, from the stories you guys told me, that that's where I'm probably going to end up. So I told on myself, and sure enough, my mom, she likes control. So she is like, okay, we're going to get you to a meeting. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And, it's what I needed. I'm the type of person who needs direction, and, I follow it to the best of my abilities. And, she was on it, and she was on me. And then, I had to tell my dad, Brian, and then, he was on me too. And he's not like on me like my mom was, but he's on me enough. And he just gives me suggestions, and I'm super grateful because, my worst day in sobriety is never as bad as my best day drinking. And I am like, I don't even know how I got here. Sometimes, I'm just like, man, God, thank you, because he's really worked in my life, and to get me, to where I am today. I couldn't even hold a day sober. I was a chronic relapser, going in and out, in and out, in and out. And, but I'm really thankful for the back room, because they watched me since I was a kid. They watched me come in, and they watched me go in and out, in and out, in and out. And they never shut the door on me. They never looked down on me. They just opened their arms and just said, keep coming back. And that's all I did. That's really all I did right in the beginning, was I kept coming back and kept coming back. I never ever let a week go by, a day go by. I literally would come back within hours after drinking, or the night before drinking. And I'm really grateful for this program, because it finally gave me a life worth living. Before here, I didn't want to live. And I'm coming up on 5 years, so I'm a little emotional because I'm back home where it all started. And I get to spend time with my dad. And I feel like I'm someone now that he could be proud of. Because before this program, I was a liar and a cheat and a thief. And even into the beginning of this program, I lied about my sobriety multiple times. And this program taught me how to be a woman with integrity, who doesn't have to lie anymore, who's okay with being in her own skin, and who loves herself, because you guys taught me that. And you guys just kept loving me until I could finally love myself. So I'm super grateful for this program. And I'm super grateful for God and how he's walked and held my hand every step of the way, because, I used to go to church all the time and go to church drunk, and I never found God. But this program taught me how to find him and how to connect with him, and how he shows up in my life and how prominent he is. And I get to see the miracles, not only in myself, but in the people in this program. So thanks for letting me share.
Thank you. Just join me in welcoming Brian.
That's funny. My name's Brian. I'm an alcoholic. And grateful to be clean and sober and in my right mind most of the time. My sobriety date's December 22nd, 1981 BC, and that's for before crack. And it's supposed to share in a general way what happened, what it was like, and what it's like now. First of all, I want to thank Chanel for doing a great job speaking, and I'm real proud of her. In 5 years, she'll have 5 years tomorrow morning, so that's a big deal. It's like, who would have thunk it? Not me. I remember, I'm not going to tell all of her story, but, she came in my life when she was in middle school, and been there ever since. and she was doing her drinking and working on her pitch, and came to a point where, she was living with me again, and I told her, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. I said, you're going to have to go live with your mom again, because her drinking was getting pretty out of hand. And I know how I was with my parents, and I remember how my parents were with me, and trust me, it was nothing like that between her and I. And my parents were pretty. My dad was pretty harsh. He led with an iron fist, when growing up, and and I was a defiant young youth anyway. And I remember, at a young age that he used to pound on my brother and I a lot. But I had a smart mouth too, so that didn't help. I mean, I probably, after I got sober and I went through the steps and got a little outside help, I realized that I actually had a great childhood. But if he would have asked me in my first year or so, I would have told you it was horrible. I hate my dad. I wished he was dead, and blah, blah, blah. I think a lot of kids go through that growing up until you get older. And, when you hear other people's stories, you're like, holy crap, my life was like Ozzie and Harriet compared to that. So I'll start with going back, I had my first drunken blackout when I was 10 years old, and I was considered a late bloomer, I guess, but, I was at a family New Year's Eve party and everybody was getting hammered, and, I don't even remember seeing my parents drunk that night, but I saw a lot of other people pounding alcohol, and I was like, that stuff looks pretty cool. So they had a bar thing going on over there, and I was watching, and I just slipped behind the bar and stood up on a stool and was up there mixing drinks for people, and was just putting all kinds of crap in these drinks, and people were pounding it, and I was like, I'm going to give this a shot. They're having a good time. So I slammed that down, and and I blacked out, and I thought that was awesome, and I wanted more. But I just remember when that stuff went down and it hit my stomach and my throat was on fire, and I was like, this is way cool. And like I said, I just wanted more. And I didn't become an alcoholic that night, at 10 years old, but I knew I wanted more of that stuff coming. So I was always, going and, getting into whatever I could, getting into my mom and dad. My parents were not alcoholics, so, and I was like, I was always trying to figure out, because people go, oh, alcoholism is hereditary, and because I figured that maybe I got my alcoholism off a toilet seat or something, because my parents were like teetotalers, and they were the kind of people, we'd go to Mexican food, they'd get a beer, and they'd be nursing that beer through the whole dinner, and I was like, what the hell? I mean, I remember when I first got, first got sober, I was used to always watch them, and they'd drink half the beer and set it down, and they're like, okay, let's go. And I was like, you're not going to finish that? And, I was like in my first year of sobriety. They're like, no. And I tell them, that's alcohol abuse. You guys need to drink all of that. And, so I knew I didn't get my alcoholism from my parents. But later on, my mom said, you're just like your grandfather. And I was like, oh, okay. So Grandpa was I guess, the family alcoholic. So anyway, off and on, I got into, a lot of different stuff. I found life through chemistry sets too, as Eric B. when I first got sober always used to say, and he didn't. When I first got sober, back in '81, I mean, people did not talk about drugs in AA. They really didn't like it. They hated that stuff. I remember going to different meetings, and I'm not going to talk a lot about my drunk a lot, because we all know how to get drunk. We all know that, we do stuff that we don't want to do. I mean, I always say alcohol and drugs took me everywhere I never wanted to go and made me do things I never wanted to do. So that pretty much sums it up. I mean, and that's my sharing in a general way. But, one thing I can tell you is I love Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't love AA when I got here. When you come into AA at 23 years old, and you're sitting around a room like this with a bunch of old people, and you're looking around, you're like, Jesus Christ, is this what my life has come to? It's like, it's not like I sat there and said, this is awesome, you had all these old people coming up to you telling you, let us love you until you can love yourself. I'm like, get away from me. And there wasn't a lot of young people when I got sober. But I gravitated towards, the people that had time. I first, and whenever there was young people when I first came in, we all hung out with each other, and, because we had our own little crews, and, we were the ones that were, that they used to talk about standing outside the club. Cheryl remembers when I got sober, and, and they said we'd, all of us young kids, would, as they call us, be outside snapping our fingers and popping our heels, and, we were still, I was still smoking then, and, it was, everybody smoked in the club, and and after and it was so smoky at these meetings, like Torrance Memorial Hospital meeting where I got sober in the basement, of that meeting, there was so much smoky, it was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and it was crazy, and I was just like, I was having fun, because you could, drink coffee, the legal drugs of AA, caffeine, nicotine, and sugar. It's like. I was like, this is great, and then later I added gossip to that too, because that's illegal too. But then I started saying, no, gossip's not really a good drug, but you hear a lot of it around AA. I remember one of my friends, Biker Andy, somebody told me, oh my God, Andy Groh died, and I was like, really? I just talked to him last night, and so I was like, oh my God, he died. So I called him and I said, hey Andy, he goes, yeah. I go, are you dead? He said, no. He goes, what the hell are you talking about? I said, somebody told me in AA that you died. And he started laughing. He said, no, I'm still here. And so, you hear a lot of stuff in AA. It's not always true. So be careful what you pass along in Alcoholics Anonymous about other people. Unless you hear it from their mouth, or whatever. I've heard people say, oh, so and so smoking pot, or so and so. It's like, who cares? The only a-hole you got to worry about is the one right here in your genes right here, right now. You don't have to worry about what everybody else is doing. AA, when I was new, wasn't a big deal to me, and it was kind of, it was just kind of fun. I was young and was just bouncing around. And I remember going from meeting to meeting thinking I was missing something, I'd be in one meeting and I'm like, holy crap, what's going on in that other meeting? And I'd get up and bolt and go to another meeting, because, I was drinking coffee, I was vibrating, and I just didn't want to miss anything. But, I was always in meetings because, people when I was new said, meeting makers make it. And, if you, stick with the winners, win with the stickers. And there's so many AA cliches you hear around here. And my buddy Rocky that I got sober with, we were like 7 days apart. And he always used to say, if Rocky and Rambo can stay sober, anybody can, and Rambo's my nickname, by the way, but I don't know if we'll get into that story. That's another one. But, there's so many people when I got sober that had these, crazy nicknames, China Joe, Radio Ron, Rotten Ron, little prick about this tall, and he always had a toothpick in his mouth, and he's always calling people stuff I'm not going to repeat, but trying to, and started with CS, but he was a funny guy, and like I said, there was just there's Rashid was one of the people that grabbed me when I was brand new at the old club in Manhattan Beach where I got sober, and on PCH, and I know Cheryl remembers that clubhouse, and it was. I remember my first few meetings I was going there. It was right across the street from Mr. Pocket's pool hall in Manhattan Beach is where the old club was. And, I remember going in there and I remember I ran across the street and there's all these Harleys parked out at the curb. And I met, somebody gave me the address at South Bay Hospital program I went to. There was a spin drive with a girlfriend of mine that I met, out there partying. I met her on the Strand. I was roller skating down the Strand, hammered on Quaaludes and drinking, and I'm wearing these shorts that are way too small for me, and I see this girl, and I go skating up to her, and it's kind of like I always like those commercials, where people are dancing through the flowers, seeing each other, and and they meet, and that's how we met. And I remember talking to her, and I don't know why I thought it was funny, and I pulled my shorts up to here, and my chest was like showing off, making jokes, and she said, your nuts are hanging out the bottom of your shorts. And I looked down, and I just laughed it off. I was drinking and eating Quaaludes, so I didn't really care. But I went and I sat down and I had we had something to eat, and I was telling this girl my life story, in like a short I told her all the crazy stuff I did in, you know, my drinking and drugging days, and she said, you know, we should go out. And so anyway, I started going out with her, and turns, you know, for a while, and it turns out her mom was in AA, and I didn't know that at the time, but, you know, they said her mom, you know, was having a nervous breakdown and had to go into South Bay Hospital, and I was like, wow, that's too bad. And I got to know her family for a while, and their family was all effed up. And you know, when she told me, my mom is in South Bay Hospital, and they're going to have this family group thing, and my dad says you should come along. And I was like, yeah, your family's all effed up. I said, yeah, I'll go. And so I started going to this hospital program with them, and they sent me into a room with what they called co-alcoholics at the time, and you know, we had a family groups where we all talked and blah, 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 but they sent me in this room, and I think I was set up, you know. So. I'm young, and so I go in this room, and there's this one counselor, his name's Jerry Butchko. I think some of the people, if they remember him from South Bay Hospital, but this guy looked pretty gnarly, and they said he was sober, and I was like, Jesus Christ, man. If he looks that bad sober, I wonder what he looked like drinking. I mean, he had, you know, sunken sockets. I'm not talking crap about the guy. I'm just saying he's pretty scary looking. And he said, oh, we're all talking about, you know, what our drinking is like. And you know, I'm like, oh, this is cool. And so we're going around the room, and people are going, hey, you know, I had 1.5 glasses of wine or whatever, and poured half down the drain and this and that. And all these people are saying that stuff. And I was thinking, man, what a bunch of effing lightweights these people are, right? And gets around to me, and he goes, so, Brian, do you ever drink? And I said, oh, yeah. And he was like, so what's a normal night for you like drinking? And I said, well, I mean, the first time I was ever honest in my life, I don't know. I mean, usually I lie, but, you know, I said, well, I don't know. I have, you know, a couple 6-packs of Bud, you know, a few grams of cocaine, you know, 6, 7, 8, 10 Quaaludes, and smoke a couple big indica hooters as big as my thumb, and, you know, and this and that. And I look over, and they're all like going, you know, and he's like, you know what, I think you're in the wrong room. And so he says, you belong down the hall with the alcoholics. And I was like, well, really? Oh, okay, cool. So, you know, because I didn't really know what, you know, alcoholics were. So they took me down the hall and took me in a room and said, hey, everybody, this is Brian. He's an alcoholic. Everybody cheered, you know, and so we sat down, and then, you know, we all did our thing. But so that ended up, you know, doing that. They call it spin dries, I think, is what they call them back then. I don't know what they call them now. And I call them money makers. But, you know, people were in there talking about alcohol or going to AA. That's what they said. You need to go to AA. And I remember asking, what's the Automobile Association going to do for me? I mean, I didn't know what AA was. And they said, no, a-hole, it's Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm like, oh. I'm like, all right, what's that? And then they said, oh, they have these meetings, and, you know, people don't drink. And it's like, that's a little harsh. And so, you know, but they ended up saying that I needed to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and, you know, and change my life. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And but I ended up going to some meetings. Somebody told me to go, and I ended up going, like I said, to Manhattan Beach Club. And there was this old biker lady working at the club when I first you know, like I said, when I first was across the street. I don't have a canned pitch, as you can tell, but I start in the middle, work my way out, like Frank Priest always, you know, told me he did. And I'm kind of the same way. I'm all over the place. But it's language of the heart, you know, and I never know what I'm going to say up here, and I'm just as surprised as you are what comes out of my mouth. So I'm across the street from Mr. Pockets, where I used to get hammered all the time, I saw all these Harleys parked out front, and I run across the street. You know, and there's a couple guys out there wearing wife beaters. They're all tatted out, long hair. They had this one guy called himself Two Hip Tony, and I run over there, and he looks at me and he goes, "You must be looking for AA." And I looked around and I said, "How did he know?" And he goes, "Just walk right in that door and see Eunice. She'll tell you what to do." And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I'm still thinking it's a biker bar because there's all these Harleys. So I walk in there, and this old biker lady back there, Eunice, looks at me and she goes, "What are you looking at?" And I'm like, I wanted to say, you know, like, F you, you know, blah, blah, blah. So, but I didn't. And she goes, "You're looking for the AA meeting?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And she goes, it's upstairs here. And I'm like, she says, so get your ass upstairs and go to a meeting. I'm like, man, these people are rough around here. So, I go up, I follow direction well, so I run up the stairs, and turns out there were 12 steps up to that room. I never counted them, but that's what people always told me. And I believe pretty much everything everybody tells me in AA. And so I went up to that meeting, and I'm sitting in that meeting, and it wasn't real big, but they had these old crusty couches in there and all kinds of chairs. It looked more like a smoking lounge or something to me. People are smoking, and I just remember there was, like I said, older people, and there was this one guy. I remember this one guy in there. I know Cheryl knows the guy I'm talking about, and probably Andy. But there's this guy. His name was Lifeguard George. Is what they called him. But he was a lifeguard, so imagine that. I call him Lifeguard George. But so Lifeguard George is over there, and he's telling a story, and he said, I had a catharsis last night, and I'm sitting here, and then he started crying, and I'm like, oh my God, this guy's crying. And so I'm looking around the room, and because I'm a tough guy when I got sober. I was taught men don't cry. Ask my dad; he'll tell you. He always used to tell me, I'll give you something to cry about if you're going to cry. I was like, no, I'm good, man. He'd thump on me, and I was not allowed to cry, so anyway, Lifeguard George is crying. I'm looking around like, holy crap, man, there's women in here. You shouldn't be crying. And because I didn't know, and I didn't know what a catharsis was either. I thought he had an effing heart attack. So my vocabulary was all F words. And a lot of people here, Cheryl can vouch for that, and know that I had a foul mouth when I got sober, and sometimes I'm still known to drop an F-bomb. Trying to clean up my act. I figure after 43 and a half years, I should do something right. So Lifeguard George did that, and and I figured, I found out what all that meant, and then and everybody, then I was talking to my sponsor, the guy that became my sponsor when I very first got sober, and he told me that it's okay for men to cry, and I always say I've been crying ever since. So because now I can't even watch AT&T commercials or or any of that stuff. I watch stuff like that, I start crying, and it's okay, But growing up and all the, stuff that I went through growing up in life, it wasn't okay. So I'm glad I'm not really a tough guy. I just thought I was growing up, and, and did a lot of, like I said, drugs and alcohol made me do a lot of stuff I never wanted to do, and be in places I never wanted to be. And, thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous, these last 43 and a half years, I've gone to places that I've always wanted to go and done things I've always wanted to do, and became a productive member of society instead of a menace to society. And I've had an amazing career in Alcoholics, and because of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I always like to say a rich, full life. And I'm not talking money, property, and prestige, but I'm talking I don't have that big hole in my gut, when you first get here, and you have that anxiety, and he can relate back there. And that's the thing is, this is a disease of identification. People share. You go to meetings, you hear people share their stories, and and we're all like, yeah, because we can relate to all the craziness and the insanity, and that goes on in our lives. And some take it to whole different levels. Because of my job, I share in a very general way. What I was like. So, because of AA and because of Alcoholics Anonymous, like I said, I've been given this amazing career where I have clearances and do all this stuff that I can never talk about. I always tell people, well, can't you tell me? And I say, I can tell you, but I have to kill you if I tell you. And but because of Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been given this huge, amazing life. But I can tell you, I've been, and I'm not bragging or anything, but I have been inside several space shuttles. I've actually slept in a couple space shuttles. It's in there babysitting and hanging out, and so that was pretty cool. And I've, been down there to the Kennedy Space Center many, many times, and been involved in, a lot of fun stuff, and seen stuff that I never would have saw. I remember one time I was standing inside, I don't know, I think it was a Titan IV missile, and we were sitting there on the pad, and I remember I even got a little teary-eyed, and some guy walked up and he's like, "Hey, what's wrong?" So I said nothing. I said just being here, I'm a little emotional because guys like me don't get to go to places like this when you come from where I came from, because I know you find it hard to believe I wasn't really a nice guy before I got here, and I found out when I came to AA that I always wanted to be a nice guy, and I always wanted to treat people with dignity and respect, but the people I grew up with and the places I hung out in and the things that we did, that wasn't the protocol, and Chanel said she never got arrested. I wish I could say that, but even though a lot of the bad stuff that I got in, I had arrest records and stuff, but for minor stuff, and even the night I was being discharged out of the Marine Corps in 1979, I got arrested the night before, and I had to call my brother. I was embarrassed to call anybody because they said you get one phone call. So I called my brother and asked him to come bail me out. I said because I gotta, if I don't show up at in the morning to get discharged, they're gonna consider me AWOL. And by the grace of God, he came down and bailed me out. And that was one of many times of being arrested. But I mean, I don't even know how I was able to get get an honorable discharge out of the Marine Corps, but that was another one of those by the grace of God, because I wouldn't have the job and the career that I have if I would have gotten what I probably would have deserved as a dishonorable discharge, because I was not a perfect Marine, I can guarantee you that. But again, alcohol and drugs take you everywhere you never want to go and makes you do things you never want to do. And because of AA, it's turned me into a person that became responsible. I suit up and I show up. This is not how I normally dress. Ask most people that know me. I'm like Big Mike over here. I'm a shorts and t-shirt kind of guy. Underneath this, I have tattoos. I ride a Harley. I'm not a biker. I cry too much, and but I do ride motorcycles with my friends, and we have fun. We have so much fun in AA, we can hardly stand ourselves. And when I was new, I thought AA was boring. And they told me AA is not boring, you are. And but I've found so much stuff to do in sobriety, and it's limitless, and so many sports and so many activities, and from surfing to skydiving to scuba diving to snow skiing. I got in ski patrol and for a few years, and the list goes on and on. I think the most fun I have is riding my Harleys with my buddies, and we go on destinations all over the place. Some cross country and go to Sturgis, and some just local rides, and we have a blast. Sometimes we'll do as many as 500 miles in a day on the motorcycles, and you feel free. I mean, you're out there, your hair in the air, your knees in the breeze. I mean, when I was out there drinking and using, I used to ride motorcycles, but we didn't wear helmets, and I remember going down the freeway one time doing about 150, 160 miles an hour, and had no helmet on. I was wearing board shorts, flip-flops, and sunglasses, though. And I think I was, and a few times, stupid, and that's why when I got sober, I was not a vision for you. I just, I had really long blonde hair. I mean, some people say, I remember when you had hair. I'm like, yeah, thanks. No. But I came in here, I had long blonde hair and a ponytail. And I remember when I was skydiving, my hair would knot up, because it would be hanging out the back, through my helmet if I wore one. Most of the time I didn't, but then I'd get down to and I looked like, my hair would just be a rat's nest. And, but it's better than waking up. I remember, out those nights of drinking, waking up naked, wrapped around the toilet. That was a lot of fun. It's funny when you're out there, you're thinking you're having so much fun, and the room's spinning. I remember a trick that somebody taught me. The room's spinning. You're on the bed, and the room's spinning. There's that popcorn ceiling, and it's just swirling, man. It looks like one of those crazy TV shows you used to watch on TV when the thing's spinning around, and put your foot out, the one leg goes out and hits the floor, and you put the brake on. We called it putting the brake on. You're on there like, and you're sitting there and like, whoa. And you wake up in the morning, you look in the mirror and you look like Don King, man. Your hair's all like this. You got dried vomit in your hair. You got, dried vomit all over you. And then you go to your friends, what did we do last night? And they're like, oh, we had a blast. I'm like, oh, all right, because when people, how the next day people, what'd you guys do last night? I was like, oh, man, we had so much fun. And most of the time I didn't really remember. I mean, most of the stuff I had to, ask my friends, did we have fun last night? Oh, yeah, we had so much fun. But I was also, I was also one of those guys, when I drank and used, I thought people wanted to see my anatomy. So I was also one of those guys at parties. Well, I mean, because streaking was pretty big back in those days, and we used to run naked. I mean, I ran naked through Old Town Mall, and on a bet, I won $20 for that. It was worth it. And but running naked up and down Manhattan Beach Boulevard, where I grew up, down there by Inglewood Avenue, and running stores in and out. Even in high school, I forgot what that was one of the best ones. I was running naked through high school, but I did put a stocking over my head because I was on a wrestling team, and my English teacher, as I'm running by, she yells, "Brian!" I'm like, and we had a van out front. We all ran out and got in the van and came back, and she tried to pick up on me later in school, but she did. But wish I had a better story about that one, but we'll just leave that alone. But that was just a couple of the highlights of what alcohol does for you as a kid growing up, and but it was all in fun. I'm just grateful that I came to AA at a young age, and I'm grateful that I stayed. And I'm glad I stuck with the winners and people like Cheryl, and there's so many of us that don't make it. They had a service today for one of our guys, John Kirchhoffer, who didn't make it. And, I always say the best messages that you could hear, you're never going to hear, because, those are the people that died from the disease. This disease wants our last breath. It wants us dead. I always say my disease is outside right now doing push-ups, waiting for me to get weak again, and then take me out. When I was asked to speak, I was taught also early on that when, asked to do a commitment or speak at a meeting or anything, the answer is yes. The only time we are supposed to say no is when we got a prior commitment. And when Syl asked me to speak here tonight, I just said yes. And then I found out I was like the 9th or 10th person she asked that night at Saturday. I felt a little special, but it's okay. I could have said I was going to bingo, and like everybody else tonight, and I was also taught if you're coasting in AA, you're going downhill. And so I don't coast in AA. I've been accused of going to too many meetings, like I'm going to get too sober, and that's not going to happen. So if you're new or thinking about being new, you can never go to too many AA meetings. I don't care what anybody says. When I was new, they told me go to 90 meetings in 90 days, and if you're not happy, we'll be glad to refund your misery. So I was like, oh, okay. I was also told it's $1 million program shoved up your ass a nickel at a time. So. You hear all kinds of cool stuff here in Alcoholics Anonymous. I call them nuggets, and and like I said, I hated my dad when I got here. And because of AA, I turned that around. There it goes again. But and I got to be a good son. And they got to see me for 24 years before my dad passed, and then my mom 3 years after that. But what I was taught too, because of Alcoholics Anonymous, that I get to, make those living amends and be a service to my parents. I mean, when they lived up by Lake Shasta, I drove up there all the time, was working on their property and helping them cut down trees and doing all kinds of stuff. And it wasn't stuff I really wanted to be doing, but I was taught, that that's what we do. We got to make those living amends. So I was grateful that I got to do all that stuff and be there for them, and I try to be there for other people, and like I say, and I just keep, I still do service, commitments, and I'm the supplies guy on Friday night at our meeting, and I go with some of these guys, and we have fun at that meeting. It's, Happy Joyous and Friday, over there in Torrance, and it's a fun meeting. It's not real big, but it's nice. My sponsor goes there, and his wife started that meeting, and it's like, and I know a lot of people go on Zoom. Hello, and I just remember I'm on TV. I think there's at least 2 people on there, but it's like I feel like a circuit speaker tonight with all these people. But I don't let anything get in front of Alcoholics Anonymous. I really don't. And even Frank Priest, my old sponsor Frank Priest always told me, you don't let work and going to school get in front of AA. I mean, Frank was, some people say he was an angry dude. I said, you didn't know Frank. That guy was very passionate about Alcoholics Anonymous. And what he said, he got tired of burying people. And that's why he was so passionate about it, And I remember when I was brand new, I was like a year sober, and I was going to speak at Foot Stompers and down there in South Redondo. It used to be on Broadway. And he comes up and I remember him saying, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, I'm really nervous." He said, "Why?" I said, "I'm speaking tonight." And he was like, he had these long, skinny fingers. He's a tall, thin guy. And he says, "You're not going to say shit." And he's poking me in the chest. I always wanted to just, I didn't like people touching me, it reminded me of my dad, and I always wanted to snap his finger off. And he said, but he was such a nice man, and he said, and he told me, "I'm going to say shit. What you're going to do is you're going to put your head down, you're going to ask God to speak through you, and ask him to put the bullshit filter on your mouth and say what he wants you to say." So that's what I've been doing for the last, 41 and a half years, because I'm not here to win friends and influence people. I'm here to save lives. And I'm here to save my life, and thank God for the, people like Eric B., that was around and talked about King Alcohol kicked his ass, and, and that we don't use chemistry sets in AA. And, I remember going to meetings back then where when I was brand new, I used to identify as a crazy alcoholic dope fiend, and, because I wanted to be different. And they say that's kind of like identifying as a German Shepherd dog. It's like, But I remember Frank saying, "You need to drop the crazy." He says, "We all know you're crazy, so you don't need to say that anymore." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And he says, "You don't need to say you're a dope fiend either, because this is Alcoholics Anonymous." So singleness of purpose is identify as an alcoholic, because everybody's, most of us, I grew up in the Just Say Yes generation. I mean, I never said no to a drug unless I misunderstood the question. I was like, and my drink of choice was yes, and I was that guy that, when I was drinking, as we were talking about this earlier, but I used to drink a lot of, I never drank mixed drinks. I drank straight stuff, even at the California Jam concert that I went to back in, what year was that, 1974, I had 4 Bacardi pints stuffed in my cowboy boots when we were going into the concert. And, but I was the guy that'd spin the cap off and throw it away. My friends were like, "Dude, you just threw the cap away." I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "But how are you going to close that up?" And I'm like, "Dude, don't worry about it. It's not going anywhere." Because I drank straight out of the bottle, and I chugged it. Now, even before I get on my motorcycle, before I'd go out on Friday nights or whatever, before I got sober, I'd pound a half a pint or a pint. And, and my friend's like, "Dude, you're nuts." And I was like, "What? I'm getting primed. We're going out. We're going to the bars. We're going to clubs. We're going to have fun." And, but it got to the point where people didn't want to be around me anymore. I mean, at the end, literally, people were telling me, "You're not welcome here anymore." My friends are, all my friends are getting married and, doing stuff. And me, I was, we were living as life's a party, sky's the limit. It's pretty sad when you look back at, at that. But I've had such a rich, amazing, full life because of Alcoholics Anonymous that I would have missed, if I would have taken one more drink. And, I'm glad, some people always say, if I'd have known it was going to be my last drink, I would have had one more, and, we can laugh about that. But if I'd have had one more, I wouldn't be here today. When I came to, and I literally came to on December 22nd, 1981, and what I always say, I came to AA, and I came to believe, because this last time I came here, I barely got here, because on December 21st, I didn't want to live anymore, so glad I didn't kill myself, they also told me if I would have done that, it would have been a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And it's true. And you'd have a different speaker here tonight, and you wouldn't even know who I was. But to this day, if you talk to both my sisters, they start crying because they said if I didn't get sober, I'd be dead. I would have never seen 25 years old. So I'm grateful that I did come to AA, and I'm grateful that I got a sponsor. I worked the steps and paid back all the money. I did my 4-step at 90 days sober. And I've always had sponsorship, and throughout sobriety, and they told me when I was new, the steps will set you free, and they have. And when I got here, I didn't couldn't really look people in the eyes. I was looking at people's feet. I knew most people by what they were wearing on their shoes, because that's how low my self-esteem and self-worth and everything was. And now AA turned me into a responsible human being, and good sponsorship about not letting anything get in the way of Alcoholics Anonymous. Eric B. and Angry Clem used to take me to Martyrs down there on 22nd Street in Hermosa Beach and talk program to me when I was new. I said, "What do these two a-holes want from me? What's the scam going on here?" And then I was thinking, well, I don't have anything. If it wasn't for AA, I wouldn't even eat in probably my first year of sobriety. I was struggling, looking for work, and when you're new, watch out what you pray for because you might get it. And because I was praying for a job, and I got a job. I remember my first job in sobriety was a Pizza Hut, and not real proud of that. But and I didn't work there long, thank God. But people in AA loved me, though, because people were coming in there after meetings. Of course, they put me on night shift, too, and I hated that even more because I was, missing my AA meetings at night. Because when I got sober, they didn't have morning meetings. You had to vibrate till noon, right? And it was tough. And I was also sleeping on my buddy Jim Carpenter's couch my first 30 days of sobriety. He said, "Yeah, you can stay on." I called him when I came to on December 22nd and said, "I need help." And he went out at 34 years. We both had the same year of sobriety. He went out at 34 years because he quit going to meetings. Do you hear me? Quit going to meetings. And that's what happens. Most alcoholics, they always lie about what happened until they've been around here a while, and then they tell you, "I wasn't going to meetings." Because I hear people say, because I never heard anybody come into AA say, "I was going to too many meetings, sponsoring too many people, working too many steps, and I decided to get loaded." Maybe, but I call, as Frank would say, horse shit. Frank, anybody that knew Frank Priest knew that's what he would say, right? And he was great. And and I have his original big book. I got a first edition big book his son gave me. I got another book that he used to carry. He always carried a big book, and we call it the operator's manual. And I almost brought the book today, and the one he has a circle and triangle leather cover that Temecula Tom used to make all of us back in the day. And, and we even, one time we went on a prison panel together, and him and I got rousted, because we pulled up to the prison panel, and he goes, "Oh, crap." He goes, "I left my big book in Denny's." And I was like, "Oh, man," we were pulling up to the prison panel. We turned around, flew back to Denny's, and his big book was still there. We grabbed it and went back to the meeting. As we pulled up, these guys came out with guns and made us get out of the car. And they said, "Oh, and I'm losing my mind." I was still a little bit of a tough guy back then. So I'm yelling at these guys, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" I said, "What's wrong with you a-holes?" I'm calling them F this, F that. And they said, "Oh, we're afraid you're coming here to break people out." And I said, "Oh, yeah, I brought this old bastard over here so he can break people out of prison." And I'm like, "Give me a break." I said, "We're here for Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you." And so we went in and did the prison panel, and like I say, he was one of the guys that also, I followed, thoroughly followed the path. I went with him on panels and meetings all over the place. And back to Eric B. on 22nd Street with Angry Clem. Like I said, see, you can tell I don't have a canned pitch, but he said, "Okay, Trick, number one is AA and God. Number two is your health. Number three is your job. And number four is your relationships. He says you just don't tell your relationships are number four in your life. But as long as you keep them in that order, your life's going to be okay. So, and that's what I've always done. And then when and I know Zoom came out, and I think a lot of people got lazy. That's just my opinion. And a lot of people don't go to in-person meetings anymore. And I need that in-person stuff because I need to see people's eyes, because I can't tell when you're full of shit. And unless I can see you face to face, and you can sit on Zoom meetings and in your underwear. And I spoke at a meeting once, and all I had on was a shirt and jacket, and it was pretty cool. I did it just because I knew I could, and I hate speaking on Zoom meetings, man. I mean, I did it when people asked me, but I didn't like it. I don't like talking to a green dot on a computer, but I need to be in AA meetings. This is a game of ass and chair. You can't sit at home. There's nobody going to come knocking on your door and ask you to sponsor them. So if you're not in meetings, you're not getting the real deal. I need to shake hands. I need hugs. I need all those things that I hated when I was new. I didn't like people hugging me when I was new. But I love that stuff now. There was a lot of other. Who was that? Hugging Helen or Horny Helen? A couple of, and these were old ladies. I was like, I don't even want to know how you got your nickname. I just, a couple of my buddies were Big Dick and Little Dick. Where's your minds? And but it was Richard and Richard, but that's how we identified him, because one was bigger than the other. And Serenity Sam and Singing Sam, and I mean, it's just so many people. I mean, I walked on the shoulders of giants is how I felt. I remember meeting Chuck Chamberlain when I was brand new. I was at a YMCA AA meeting on a Sunday night, and he spoke there, and he introduced me to him as a CNI newcomer. And, you come to AA and, you make lifelong friends. You can just have an amazing life. You work the steps, you pay back all this money that you owed people, even though you didn't want to own. I mean, I didn't, wasn't able to get into all that, but, and Rashid, when I was brand new, gave me a 12 and 12, which some newcomer stole from me, which kind of broke my heart. But I had a 12 and 12 when he grabbed me at the old Manhattan Beach Alano Club. There was a little area between that, remember downstairs? That little area outdoors right there was just real small with a little table. And he wrote in there little stick figures, and he's saying, uncover, discover, discard, is what we do here in AA. And, it was kind of hard taking all this information in when you're brand new, but, thank God for people like him that took the time out, to talk to me and talk program to me, and all the other long timers that, always used to grab me, and, and then, and even Patch Alex had the, that pirate patch over his eye, and, he became my sponsor after Frank died, and he sponsored Frank, and then he passed, and I got a younger sponsor, because I said, I'm getting tired of my sponsors dying, so I asked a younger guy to sponsor me. And we were friends for a lot of years, and then he fired me because we had a political indifference. It's okay. But I got a great sponsor now, John McCormick, John Anonymous McCormick, and I love that guy. You can't sponsor yourself, because if you don't have a sponsor, I always say you're sponsoring yourself, and you got an a-hole for a sponsor, You got to have somebody to run all your bright ideas by. Even though I've been around here 43 and a half years, trust me, I get bright ideas. So I need to run my stuff by somebody else. Otherwise I'm going to myself. And I know some people go, I got 6 sponsors. I was like, yeah, it's like when you're a little kid and you want to go around and wait until, mommy or daddy gives you the right answer, and it's like, no, it doesn't work that way. Not in my book. I get one person, it's one-on-one, and that's where I go to for my information. I'm grateful that I was, taught the way I was taught, and it wasn't tough, tough love. People were really, kind and gentle and loving to me. That tough love stuff wouldn't have worked for me. I mean, I got that out there on the streets. It's like I know all about the tough stuff. But what I need is people to be kind and loving and gentle and point me in the right direction and give me good, orderly direction, because when I was new, the word God scared me out, was going to scare me out here, and people said, it's good, orderly direction or group of drunks. Anyway, that's enough out of me. I've rambled on for enough. So I love you guys. If nobody's told you that today, I love you all, and thanks for having me here. And I'm grateful that everybody showed up here tonight.